All right, welcome, my friends, to another episode here of Extreme Health Radio. This is actually episode 647. Can you believe that? 647 shows. I just can't believe that we've done that much content. But I hope you guys are enjoying it. We do shows 3 days a week if you guys want to check it out. If you want to subscribe, we would be grateful for that. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time, we do live shows, and those shows are available to watch on YouTube. And so yeah, feel free to subscribe and get access to all of those. And also don't forget to subscribe on iTunes too. Lots of cool stuff happening every single day. We're releasing older content on iTunes, so every single every single day you'll get a brand new episode or a best of episode in your iTunes feed. So check that out if you guys are interested. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Brian Mowll about blood sugar and diabetes, and this is going to be really, really awesome. I'm really excited about this. This is going to be a great, great show. I'll introduce him in just a second, but quickly before we do that, let me bring up our show, or actually our schedule, and you guys can take a look at some of the shows that we have coming up. A lot of cool things happening. So obviously today, there we go. Obviously today, Dr. Brian Mowll, and we're going to be talking about diabetes, blood sugar, and metabolic health, and we're going to talk about all kinds of really cool stuff with regards to that. And then on Friday, we're going to get into the little esoteric kind of stuff. We're going to talk with Mark Gober, who wrote a book called An End to Upside Down Thinking, and we're going to talk about creating your own reality. Is that possible? Is that something that people can actually do? Quantum physics. We're going to talk about some cool stuff. So I'm looking forward to that on Friday. And then on Monday, Dr. Lee Cowden will be talking about healing the brain. And then we're going to have on Allison, I think you say her name, Huish. We'll be talking with her about her story healing her brain tumor with, I think it was frankincense oil. We had her on a while back, but the connection wasn't that great, so we had to reschedule. And if you know of anybody that has a brain tumor or whose body has a brain tumor, make sure to have them tune in for that show. So we got a lot of cool stuff happening on Extreme Health Radio, so make sure to subscribe. And I think there's a little bell down on YouTube if you're watching the YouTube show right now where you can get a notification. But that way you don't miss any of the shows coming up, and so we appreciate that. All right, so today, we're going to get into diabetes, blood sugar health, insulin levels, all of that stuff with Brian Mowll, and he's a diabetes and metabolic health coach, and he is the founder and medical director of Sweet Life Diabetic Health Centers and serves clients worldwide as a diabetes coach, and he's a master licensed diabetes educator. So he's been doing this for a long, long time, and he's been featured on Dr. Oz, on Ellen. He is an IMF certified functional medicine doctor, master licensed diabetes educator. So he's been in this for a while. So let me bring him in because we can all hear him. Turn his audio on. There we go. All right, there we go. Hello, Doc. How are you?
I'm good, Justin. Thanks for having me on. Excited for the conversation today.
Yeah. So super excited. I've known about your work for a long time, and it's great to finally have you on. You know, we have a database that goes, hundreds of people. So I'm glad to finally have you on. You come highly recommended from a lot of different people. So this will be fun. Whereabouts are you located?
I'm actually in a little beach town called Rehoboth Beach, in a very small state called Delaware. Most people have heard of it, but maybe not quite sure where it is. So we're, my state is like you can drive from the top to the bottom in about 2 hours.
Oh, wow!
And it's a narrow state, so it doesn't take that long to get through it. But yeah, I'm about 2 hours east of Washington D.C. on the coast, and then a couple hours south of Philadelphia.
Okay. So do you do any of the cold, the cold thermogenesis kind of stuff, jumping into the cold ocean, any of that kind of stuff during the winters?
Not for those reasons. Sometimes we do. There's events down here. There's a lot going on the weekends, even through our off season, and one of those is they have those polar plunges. So I'll do that as a way just to do something fun and different, but not necessarily to make more brown fat like like a lot of people do for.
Right. That's so funny. Yeah, I've been trying to do a little bit more of that here in California, but the water temperature doesn't get all that doesn't get all that cold here. It gets about what 50, I think 55 or 56 or so. So that's not really that cold, is it?
Well, I'm sure it feels cold. It's a lot colder than Florida water probably, or certainly water down in Mexico. But yeah, I think for thermogenesis, probably not gonna you're not gonna get that many metabolic benefits out of doing that. And
Mm.
it's one of those things you really have to be committed to,
Mm-hmm.
because you really have to trick your body into thinking that it needs to start building more of this metabolically active fat, this brown fat. And that means you need to be cold quite a bit, to
Mm.
stimulate that. I think 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day is probably not going to make that big of a difference if you spend the rest of your time in a comfortable heated environment. So and I will say, the other interesting thing about that is, sometimes we chase these things, these biohacking things, because they
Mhm.
seem interesting.
Mm.
But sometimes you got to ask yourself, is this really the best bang for the buck?
Mm.
So brown fat is more metabolically active than white fat. So, the adipose fat that some people have hanging around their waist really burns almost no calories. And brown fat burns a little bit more. But what burns a lot more is muscle.
Mm.
So I think I'd rather see somebody spend that time in the gym, or do some resistance training, build some more lean muscle, than just sitting in an ice bath trying to create brown fat that may or may not ever happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the problem is, well, actually, both of them are pretty challenging, aren't they? Because not a lot of people like to sit in cold water, but then most people don't like working out in the gym either. It's
Right.
great.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Yeah.
But then, there's lots of different ways to do it. You don't have to go to the gym. You can do some, Tabata exercises, or something at home.
That's true.
You can just, go out and do some weighted walks, or whatever,
Yeah.
play with some, resistance on. There's all kinds of things you can do to build a little bit more lean body mass, but that muscle mass is really, really important. And I would put that ahead of the brown fat if you have a
Mm-hmm.
goal.
So the building of the muscle, like for me, I've always been the kind of a guy that likes to work out. So I've worked out. I'm, let's see, 43, and I've been working out relatively, probably consistently, I'd say, at least 3 days a week since I was about 19, right after high school. Um, Now, building muscle, and is that going to have a beneficial effect on blood sugar levels, do you think?
Yeah, huge, huge beneficial effect. And again, I'm not talking about becoming like if you're a guy becoming like a gorilla, or like a woman building all kinds of mass up. That's not the point. The point is to stimulate muscle growth. And the more lean body mass we can have in relationship to our fat mass, number one, we're going to burn more calories just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
It's 50 times more metabolically active. So for every muscle cell, you're burning 50 times as much as that fat cell would. So that's huge.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then you're building more insulin receptors too, which we can get more into that, and what insulin is and how it relates to blood sugar and health in many ways. But we want to become as sensitive to insulin as we possibly can, and building more lean muscle mass, building more muscle
Mm-hmm.
helps us to do that. It helps create more insulin receptors and helps make the insulin receptors we have work better.
Isn't that wild? Like such a bizarre concept because really when you're going into the gym or if you're outside lifting weights or whatever you're doing, you're basically just tearing muscle fibers, right? When you're doing like a chest workout or a bicep, you're just tearing those muscle fibers and then the body will start creating more muscle cells to build more muscle. But somehow in that process, it's having an effect on your insulin sensitivities too.
Yeah. So just like you described, the body is very adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you put a stress on the body, it's going to respond by getting stronger. If you encounter some sort of germ, your immune system is going to fight that off and then build itself back up a bit stronger. Bone works that way too. When you exercise, when you do weight bearing exercise, your bones actually become stronger. That's why astronauts, when they go out into space and they're out of gravity, they come back with pretty severe osteoporosis. And
Mm.
of course, that can be changed pretty quickly once they get back into gravity and do some exercise. But they can't just hop right off the space shuttle and go for a run. They really need to be careful when they get off those things because they have to rebuild the bone strength. So that stress builds strength.
Mm-hmm.
And in much the same way, challenging muscles will build muscle strength, and it will build the muscle's ability to use fuel. And glucose is a fuel. It's the main fuel used by the muscles. So the way muscles use fuel is they have, well, there's two different pathways, but they have this hormone called insulin, which sort of opens the door, opens the gate to allow glucose to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can burn it that way. Now, the other interesting thing is when we exercise, the muscle has other ways of actually getting glucose in. So if someone is diabetic, for example, or insulin resistant, and they have high blood sugar, and they're not able to get that glucose in effectively, exercising will sort of force it in through other channels. So that's another reason to do it. But just following up with that strength analogy too, one other benefit of strength training, I think, is really important to think about, and that's that it makes us, it just makes us generally stronger and more resilient. I remember actually listening to Dr. Oz speak at a conference one time, and he said something that I thought was really interesting. He said, the number one cause, the leading cause of death in older Americans, no matter what's written on the death certificate, is fragility.
Fragility.
People become fragile as they get older. And the more fragile someone becomes, the more likely they're going to end up dying. It could be from a fall, which is a leading cause of death. It could be from a disease. It could be from pneumonia and infection. But all those things come from that body being fragile, being weakened, if you will.
It's interesting too, because Kate and I, my wife, will talk about this all the time with people that are older in our lives, and it's kind of weird how, like, if your balance, let's say, is off, and let's say you're 70, 80, 90 years old, and you're doing relatively well, but your balance is off, and then you're walking down the stairs because your balance is off, you fall, or maybe sometimes in the case of osteoporosis, maybe your hips break and then you fall. But regardless, like, you could avoid so many, issues by going into a hospital and having surgery on top of that at a, 80, 90 years old person, and then being on the drugs and medication as a result of that. And then sometimes even these people will get sick in the hospital from some infection. And it's crazy to think that, like, something as little as balance or maybe fragility, like you're talking about here, can directly be tied to someone dying when it seems like such a small thing,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of fragility, or if you look at the other side of it, resiliency and strength is having good balance, having good functional movement, and that's another thing that exercise and strength training can do for us.
And do you think exercise, like specifically, I was kind of asking you about building muscle, but what about like just cardiovascular exercise? How does that affect blood sugar? Is that as good as building muscle, do you think?
Yeah, I don't throw that out a lot. It's kind of popular today to say that, cardiovascular exercise is worthless and, get off the treadmill and just hit some weights and so forth. But I think they serve different purposes. And, we teach our clients three main types of physical activity. One is slow fat burning cardio, and that could be walking or jogging or taking your dog out for a walk or swimming or whatever you like, but or it could be going to a gym and getting on an elliptical machine. But the point is, the body's meant to move, and we just sit too much. We're too sedentary. Even people who exercise, like they say, well, I exercise regularly, they might be getting 45 minutes of exercise a day, and the rest of the time they might be sitting at their desk or driving in a car or whatever it is, sitting on the couch watching TV. So we're just way too sedentary. So we want to encourage our bodies to move as much as possible. So I always tell people, go for a walk after every meal, and just find ways to incorporate movement. Now it could be exercise. That could mean going to the gym and swimming, or
Mm-hmm.
going to the pool and swimming, or going to the gym and doing some treadmill, elliptical, stair climbing, recumbent bike, whatever. And that's great. The general recommendation, from the government and so forth, is about 150 minutes a week. And I think that's a pretty good start. I think 150 minutes a week of that type of exercise is a good goal for most people,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be 10,000 steps a day, or, uh, you know, 30 minutes 5 times a week, however you want to measure it. I think that's a good starting point. But that's really just the slow fat burning cardio, and
Mm-hmm.
that's going to really help us to burn fat. It's going to help our cardiovascular health, especially if we can get the heart rate up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been hundreds of, probably thousands of research studies on the benefits of that type of exercise. So I don't throw that out, but I think that it's just a piece of the puzzle. And the other two pieces for me are resistance training, which we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it can't be one or the other. We really need to find a way to do both. And resistance training is really important for all the reasons we discussed. It stimulates insulin sensitivity. It helps us build more lean body mass. It helps us build strength, functional movement, and helps boost our metabolism because we burn more calories even at rest.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third piece is the higher intensity piece. And we don't necessarily start people on this if if they've been sedentary,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something that you want to move towards, which is some sort of high intensity training. It could be sprint training, or they call it HIIT training, high intensity interval training, or Tabata, or something like that. But it's something where you're really getting your heart rate up, moving into what's called anaerobic exercise, where you're functioning mostly based on stored sugar, which is called glycogen in the muscles. And you're pushing your heart rate up pretty high, and you
Mm-hmm.
do that for very short intervals.
Yeah.
But that's been shown to have unique benefits to the other two forms of exercise. It's been shown to,
Really?
for example, again, increase insulin sensitivity. It's been shown to help our bodies to utilize glucose. So that's called glucose utilization,
Uh-huh.
or it reduces what's called glucose tolerance. So it makes us more tolerant, or reduces glucose intolerance, makes us more tolerant to the glucose in our diet.
Mm-hmm.
And so these things are very important as well. I think all three of those, if we could do it, we should find a place for all three of those in our fitness routine.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I've always been someone who likes to, work out and push myself in that way. But cardio has never been something that I enjoyed. It's never something that's very fun for me. And I've never really done the HIIT training, which is the high intensity training. I enjoy doing it because I like the benefit of it. But I don't know. It's never been something I needed to. I've thought I needed to do, but. It's interesting. I wanted to bring up this article because I shared this last night. You may have seen this. I think I tagged you on Instagram, but this is kind of like a spooky thing from the CDC in terms of the growth of diabetes. This is crazy. So it says here, a new CDC report, for those that are listening on the podcast version, it says here, more than 100 million Americans have diabetes or pre-diabetes. So I wanted to ask you about pre-diabetes, but I'll just read a couple sentences here. It says here, more than 100 million U.S. adults now are living with diabetes or pre-diabetes, according to a new report released by the Center for Disease Control. The report finds that as of 2015, 30 million Americans, 9.4% of the U.S. population, have diabetes. 30 million people. Another 84 million have pre-diabetes, a condition that, if not treated, often leads to type 2 diabetes within 5 years. And so let me bring Brian back up. I mean, that's a crazy thing, right? I mean, it seems like, this was 2015, so who knows? That was 4 years ago, so who knows what those numbers are now?
Yeah, that was the last data collected up to this point, and I've seen different analyses of that. Some of them have shown almost half the U.S. population. There was a few articles out there crunching the numbers, showing people who weren't aware of the fact that they had high blood sugar, and when they lumped all those in together, diabetes, prediabetes, and undiagnosed prediabetes and
Uh-huh.
diabetes, it comes out to almost 50% of the U.S. population. So it's ridiculous, and even scarier is if you look at the global incidence.
Uh-oh.
The U.S. isn't even the leading country for diabetes. That would be China,
Really?
and followed by Russia. Now they have a lot more people, but there's more people in China with diabetes, more people in Russia with diabetes, and then India is skyrocketing too. So, and if you just look at percentage wise rather than gross people, China's still up there, and India's up there. So, the U.S., China, and India are your basically your biggest three um, areas where diabetes is growing. And if you ask why, because you think about people from Asian descent, Indian descent,
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily have a lot of the same habits that we do, or at least they didn't
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to lifestyle. But over the last 20 years, they've really developed those. The Western culture has spread east, and you see fast food restaurants popping up. You see more people drinking soda, eating processed foods, um, and certain things like white rice has been in the Asian diet for a long time, but
Uh-huh.
processed refined sugars haven't. So they seem to be able to tolerate starch, but not sugar. And when you add a bunch of sugar to that genetic makeup, a lot of them become diabetic. And the interesting thing about the Asian cultures is they become diabetic without gaining weight. So you've got you oftentimes have diabetes and obesity going hand in hand, but in Asian cultures, they actually become diabetic without putting on a lot of obesity. Now they do have fat packed around their organs. They call it skinny fat, or
Mm-hmm.
there's an acronym TOFI. It means thin on the outside, fat on the inside.
Oh, okay.
So we use that to describe people who look like their normal weight, or maybe just slightly overweight, but actually they have a lot of fat packed in around their organs, like their liver and
Uh-huh.
their pancreas and even the heart and vessels. And that is the most dangerous kind of fat. So we see diabetes exploding not only here in the U.S. over the past 30, 40 years, with the obesity rates as well, but in countries that don't necessarily have the obesity that we do, diabetes is exploding as well. And a lot of it can be traced back to diet and lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
washing over a gene pool that's just completely unfamiliar too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting phenomenon, and it's really become a global crisis.
Oh, it's crazy because just on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see these memes or photos going around of people that have to have their leg amputated or have some kind of surgery for their extremities, with late stage diabetes, and it's just incredible to see what happens as a result of not getting your diet and lifestyle in order. And man, it's just nuts when you see like leg amputations, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it can happen fast too. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that they're gonna it's gonna be like a year in the making before they need to get an amputation. But I've seen it happen with patients of mine over the years. I had a guy start care with me. This is going back maybe 10 years, 5, 10 years now. But it broke my heart because the guy was doing so well. He came in to see me, and he was in rough shape when he came in to see me, but we got his blood sugar back in line. He was totally committed, started eating the right diet. And after a month or two, his numbers were getting better. He started going to the gym and working out. He actually had a personal trainer. He hired a personal trainer, and developed a blister actually on the outside of his foot from his shoes.
Oh, really?
And one of the problems is sometimes you have a little numbness in the feet with diabetes, so
Uh-huh.
they don't necessarily feel as acutely as we might. So he developed a blister. A couple of days later, he noticed it, and he treated it. I mean, he put some antibiotic ointment on it or whatever, but it started to get a little red, a little redder, a little redder. By the time he went into the emergency room, which was like, I mean, maybe a week, the thing was massively infected, and he ended up having like his outer two toes amputated because the infection had like set into the bone already.
Oh
So
my goodness.
it's scary, man. You know, it can happen super fast, and um, you know, it's just it's horrible. Now, sometimes you'll look at pictures where the foot is, you know, all black and has gangrene and all that. I mean, that obviously doesn't happen overnight, and
Right.
those are people who have usually let their blood sugar be out of control for a really long time. But most of the amputations that I hear about aren't like that. You know, they're like the, you know, the outside toe or something because things just got out of hand real quick. So it's makes you want to check your blood sugar and make sure you're not missing anything because
Right, right.
that stuff can happen quickly.
Man, oh man. So, so pre-diabetes, does pre-diabetes always come before diabetes? It sounds like that would be the case, right?
Well, I guess technically, because really pre-diabetes is just it's the same condition but to a lesser extent.
Right.
So diabetes is diagnosed based on your blood sugar, and now also there's a test called hemoglobin A1C,
Mm-hmm.
which is a sort of a different way of measuring blood sugar. And those two are diagnostic for diabetes. So if you're fasting blood sugar, that means your blood sugar usually first thing in the morning when you haven't eaten for 10 12 hours overnight, if that gets to a certain point, it crosses the threshold into diabetes, and before it gets to that point, it's considered pre-diabetes if it's elevated.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give people a reference, the range is somewhere around like 76 to 92 is considered normal for a fasting blood sugar here in the U.S. And if it gets over 100 fasting, it's considered pre-diabetes. And once it gets to 126 or above, it's considered type 2 diabetes. So
Interesting.
they're a
So,
bit arbitrary, the numbers, but that's sort of the diagnostic criteria.
mm-hmm. Interesting. So, if someone were to have high blood sugar when they were fasting and they checked it in the morning, would they want to check on multiple mornings? Is there a chance it could go back down? Well, I guess if you're fasted, I mean, that's kind of indicative of your overall default metabolic state, right?
It should be, and there are reasons it can go up. For example, if you're fighting off an infection, or you had a really rough night of sleep, or you kick the dog on the way out the door or something, and you're having a bad morning. All those things can raise your blood sugar. So
Okay.
it should be done. We usually recommend within 30 minutes of waking up, hopefully in a rested state, and it should be it should be pretty accurate. But yeah, if you test your blood sugar and it's over 100, probably want to check it a couple more times and make sure it wasn't a fluke before you run off or get too overly concerned about it.
So you're saying that the blood sugar ideally should be around 75 to 92? Is that what you said?
Yeah, 76 to 92 is the range, and if you want like a number, it's right around 83 to 85. That's sort of your bullseye.
Okay. It's interesting. I heard years ago, I think it was Dr. Hal Huggins before he passed away. Was it him or somebody else?
Mhm.
But they said you basically have, I think, about a teaspoon of free circulating sugar in your blood. And so, circulating all around your body at one time. And what he was saying was basically that, if you eat or drink, I should say, like a Coca-Cola that might have, 20 teaspoons of sugar, your body can deal with the first teaspoon, but what does it do with that other 19 teaspoons of sugar? Is that
Right.
accurate? Like how much sugar we have circulating in our blood? Is that around accurate, you think?
Yeah, that's right. It if you add it up, it adds up to about 4 grams of sugar, and so about a teaspoon of not technically not sugar, of glucose.
Okay.
So sugar, table sugar, is half glucose, half fructose, and that's important. It's an important distinction, and we can talk about why here in a few minutes if you want to. But but glucose is what we actually burn for fuel. So we have about a teaspoon of glucose in our bloodstream at all times, which means that your body is constantly putting more glucose in as it's being burned, and it does that through several mechanisms. But the main mechanism is breaking down stored sugar. So we store sugar in our liver and we store sugar in our muscles, and it's called glycogen.
Mm-hmm.
And then the body will break that glycogen down throughout the day as you need more sugar in your bloodstream. It can also make sugar from fat and from fatty acids and amino acids. So it can make it from stored protein and stored fat, but it mainly likes to tap into our glycogen, our stored form of sugar. That's the easiest place to get sugar to put back into the bloodstream, of course, when you're not eating.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you were to drink a soda that has 10 to 13 teaspoons of sugar, or doesn't have to be a sugar, it could be a glass of orange juice or a Snapple iced tea or something like that. Oftentimes they have 15 to 18 grams of sugar.
Oh, wow.
You look at all that, your body's got to do something with it. So it's not gonna use it right away. So it's gonna store what it can. But see, the problem is a lot of times those glycogen stores are already full. Like if you're not exercising, if you're not out walking and doing resistance training and doing high intensity training or whatever that exercise is for you, just out throwing the frisbee or playing or chasing your dog around, whatever it is. If you're not doing that, then those glycogen stores are already full. So you take that 13 teaspoon sugar, your body's got to put it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does is eventually usually converts it to fat and stores it as fatty acids.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. I hope you guys are enjoying this show with Dr. Brian Mowll. We're going to come back from the break and we'll ask him about difference between type 1 and type 2, and if he's worked with people with type 1 diabetes as well. Fascinating information, and I hope you guys are enjoying that. If you know of anyone who in your life is dealing with diabetes, make sure to pass this show on to them. Either tag them on Facebook or share it on YouTube, whatever you want to do, because he's got some great information about diabetes I think can help a lot of people. So I wanted to share with you guys, speaking of exercise and things like that, our little rebounder that we just love. And this is something that I do pretty much every single day, and it's the Bellicon rebounder. So rebounding is incredibly beneficial for the entire body. And let me play this little clip from one of our former guests, Dr. Lloyd Jenkins, talking about the benefits of rebounding. On the flip side of that, you have to have some sort of a way of mitigating the stress that's in our life, right? So you have to have some kind of exercise. What kind of exercises do you recommend there at the Budwig Center?
Well, every room is equipped with a rebounder or a mini trampoline. So we really believe in the little mini trampoline. I noticed you're advertising that just recently on your program. We feel that's one of the safest, most gentle and effective lymphatic cleansing things that people can do. They're not expensive really, and they can just do a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. So lymphatic drainage using the rebounder is very important. Someone who has advanced cancer, we just have them mostly do the trampoline, and they can even sit on the trampoline if they have to and bounce up and down, but some kind of exercise to keep the lymph system moving, and so that they don't just, because if you don't do anything, your body just wears out. The body has to work, the heart has to pump.
Yes, yeah, so important. And one of my favorite exercises is jumping up and down on these little trampolines. And it's funny because I used to think, like, when I first learned about these things, I always thought it was like sort of Jane Fonda back in the 1970s wearing leg warmers, and who would be doing this? It's kind of a weird exercise. I was always, like I said before, really into working out in the gym and lifting heavy weights and stuff like that. But when I realized the benefits, not only from a metabolic perspective but a circulatory perspective, it's the only exercise actually too that stimulates every single cell in your body. So it's not just like an exercise to build muscle or to increase your cardiovascular system, which is incredible for, but it stimulates every single cell in your body, and it actually helps to open and close the millions of one-way valves that you have in your lymphatic system. So not a lot of people realize this, but we have more lymphatic fluid in our body than we do blood. And for some weird, bizarre reason, medical doctors aren't really taught much about the lymph system. And this is the primary system we use to detoxify a lot of the chemicals and things that we're exposed to. Like if you go to the doctor and you feel like you're getting a cold, the first thing they'll do is they'll feel your lymph glands in your throat and your armpits and your groin, because they want to see if those things are inflamed with an infection. If you cut your finger, that's what the lymphatic system is there for. One of the reasons is to prevent those toxins from traveling from the cut and the infection in your finger all the way to your heart. So your lymphatic system is incredibly beneficial, and there's a lot of lymphatic sort of cancers happening these days. And I don't know, I'm just a big fan of these Bellicon rebounders. They're silent. They're awesome. They come with like a little stand, if you're worried about balance. So I'm a big fan of these Bellicon rebounders. And like I said, I use it every single day too. And then one of the other things too that I love is this relaxed far infrared sauna. So we just had someone who wrote in and they were asking, do you recommend the Juve red light therapy device or the sauna? And I would probably have to go with the sauna just because it's really incredible. You get immediate benefit, and the thing I like about it so much is that it's kind of like having a little spa day for yourself. You can watch in this particular sauna, your head sticks out, so you can watch a documentary and makes the time go by really quickly. But we had Ken Pressner on the show, and let me play a little clip from him about his thoughts about the sauna as well.
Also saunas, which I was listening to in the break. I'm a great believer in saunas. In fact, I take a sauna myself nearly every day. And they're tremendously effective for detoxifying metals and other toxins from the body. But if you have mercury in your mouth, what you may be doing is, instead of taking the mercury out of your tissues and out through the pores into the sweat, what you may be doing is you may be taking the mercury from your fillings and redistributing it to areas in the body which you don't want to have that mercury arrive at, the brain, the kidneys, and other areas of the body. So you should be careful with detoxification. Detoxification must be done, as I write about in my recovery protocol, in a safe manner. And if you do things safely, and if you follow things closely, the way I write about it in my book, stressing slow and steady, step by step, and doing things safely, then you should have no problem.
Yeah, a big fan of these little portable far infrared saunas. So it's great. You don't have to spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on these things. You don't have to knock out a wall. If you want to lend them to a friend, they're portable. They use far infrared technology, which is really tremendous too, because the way the far infrared waves actually penetrate the skin and go all the way down to the bones, I think it gets up to about 165, 170 degrees inside there, and it preheats, which is really cool too, because I don't know about you guys, but preheating a sauna and letting it run for 30 minutes, for 45 minutes to get it hot, then you're wasting energy, and then you got to go in there and stare at the wall. This thing is really cool. So I'm just a big fan of it, and I hope you guys are too. Sauna therapy should be a part of everybody's practice. And I'm going to ask Brian when we get back too about sauna therapy and diabetes. I wonder if there's a connection between that and if that's good for the body with regards to that. So I hope you guys are enjoying the show with Dr. Brian Mowll. This is episode 647. Let me bring up his website just in case you guys want to check it out. A lot of cool stuff happening. Where is his website? There it is. Brian, it's actually Dr. Mowll, MOWLL.com, and he's got a whole ton of things going on. Really great podcasts he has on iTunes, and some pretty cool stuff. So let me bring him back on the show, and I want to ask Brian about that, if we can bring him up. Hey, Brian, is there a connection? Do you think that sauna therapy is something that would be beneficial for people with diabetes, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's beneficial. I think there's a number of reasons why, but probably the number one reason is stimulating detoxification pathways. A lot of people don't realize that type 2 diabetes, and we can talk about the difference of type 1 and type 2, but type 2 diabetes really is more of a liver issue than it is a pancreas issue. So the pancreas makes the hormone insulin, but the liver is basically our metabolic processing machine. It takes all of the fuel that we eat, it helps to not only helps to break it down, but it helps us to utilize it. And it's mainly responsible for regulating and controlling the blood sugar. And the liver it just gets congested is really the best way to think about it. We live in
Hmm.
a world today that we're just bombarded with toxins, both internal and external toxins, from stress and from metabolizing and breaking down food. We develop internal toxins, and then from the outside, we breathe in polluted air and we use cosmetics that have all sorts of toxins in them. Our water supply, our again, food supply has uh, pesticides and additives and uh, dyes and flavor enhancers and all kinds of things that are essentially toxic to the body. So
Hmm.
in medicine, those are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs. And those endocrine disrupting chemicals or toxins have been shown to lead to insulin resistance and contribute to diabetes, and have been linked actually to both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Hmm.
So by doing things to help detoxify the body, which a sauna is one of them, you get the benefits of the infrared light, and you get the benefits of the heat, and hopefully you sweat, and you're stimulating the detoxification pathways of the body. It's a really good way to enhance liver performance, which really helps blood sugar in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah, I would think, sauna therapy has been around for thousands of years. Cultures doing it, and it's something that I love to do. But I've never really tested my blood sugar before and after, or on an ongoing basis with regards to that. So that could be something interesting to look into. I mean, you would have to think
I'd much rather sit in a sauna than an ice bath. That's for sure.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Me. That doesn't sound like fun at all. So we got a couple questions here from the chat room I wanted to ask you about really quickly. Angie wanted to know, she wanted to know about, let's see, getting into ketosis. So she says here, what about getting into and staying in ketosis? Our bodies could switch fuels long enough to heal and work using carbs well again. So I think she's wondering, like, if she does a ketogenic diet and if she's in ketosis, and then if she starts to go off the ketogenic diet, will her body adapt and work well again if she goes back and forth like that?
Right, right. Yeah, good question. And so we use ultra low carb diet or a ketogenic style diet a lot of times with our clients to help them to regain metabolic health. And I think that it's a great way to do that. When you cut carbs way down and focus on good quality fuels and fuel balance, I don't necessarily I don't necessarily think that there's something magic about uh, being in nutritional ketosis for blood sugar, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that getting into ketosis, what you need to do to get there, is really good for blood sugar regulation. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, cutting your carbs down and balancing your fuel. So doing that for a long enough period of time to get long-term results uh, can put you in a better position, and then you can start to change. So I think I hear like a reference in the question to, can I eventually start to reintroduce healthy carbohydrates and
Mm-hmm.
eat more carbs again? Healthy carbs. And the answer I find for our clients is yes. So when people go through I always break the diet down into therapeutic diet and maintenance diet. So when you go through a therapeutic diet, which we'll use an ultra low carb or ketogenic style diet as one of the therapeutic diets that we use,
Mm-hmm.
it can help you to become better at burning fat, which helps to cut sugar and carbohydrate cravings, and it helps people to be able to go longer periods of time without food, which is really good for becoming more insulin sensitive. It can help them lose weight, especially the fat that's packed in around those organs, which can make a huge difference long term. And once they do all that, like once they lose that fat, I don't want to say lose weight, because again, it's not all about how much you weigh. It's really about the fat and where the fat's stored. But
Okay.
once you burn through that fat and you become metabolically healthier. Your blood sugar is better. You've become more insulin sensitive. Then there's a process of reintroducing carbohydrates, healthy carbohydrates, and coming out of sort of, if you're in that ketogenic state, coming out of nutritional ketosis in a healthy way, and gradually, and then being able to adjust to that. There's some critiques about the ketogenic diet, and one of them is that it reduces glucose tolerance. So in other words, if you don't eat carbs for 3 months, you become way less tolerant to carbs. So like if you could eat an apple and maybe it barely affected your blood sugar, and then you go on a ketogenic diet for 3 months and you eat an apple, you might get a blood sugar spike from that. And that is true. It does decrease glucose tolerance, but the effect is short term and transient. So once you're able to slowly adjust back to eating carbohydrates again, your body will actually become more glucose tolerant than it was in the past, and you'll be able to eat those foods without having a blood sugar spike.
Interesting. Yeah. Got an email here from Doug, and it's kind of a long-winded email, but I'll just sort of summarize it. I think basically the gist of what he's getting at is it possible, do you think, to rebuild someone's pancreas with whose body has type 1 diabetes? What's your experience with that? We kind of teased that a little bit before the break, but what's your experience with type 1 and getting people's pancreases? Is it possible to get these things back online, you think?
Yeah, so let me just give a little background information there. So type 1 is an autoimmune disease similar to MS, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. The target of the immune system in type 1 diabetes is the cells in the pancreas that make insulin.
Interesting.
So pancreas is an organ, kind of sits behind the stomach, and it has a dual function. It has a digestive function. It's called an exocrine function, which makes digestive enzymes, and it has an endocrine function, which makes hormones. And those hormones include insulin and glucagon and a few others. So the cells that make insulin are called beta cells.
Uh-huh.
And in type 1 diabetes, the immune system, and no one knows exactly why, but the immune system starts attacking and killing those cells. So the end result is we can no longer make insulin. And without insulin, we can't store fuel. So what happens is you waste away. You lose weight, you're urinating all the time, you become very thirsty, and you just eventually wither away and die. And that's what used to happen back before, the mid-1920s when insulin was discovered and formulated. Huh. So people with type 1 diabetes need to inject insulin, or they use an insulin pump, which basically is a device that attaches to their skin, that feeds them insulin basically throughout the day. Or they will eventually wither away and die. So insulin is required in those cases. And there hasn't really been anything that's shown to dramatically improve the health of the pancreas in people like that. Now, there are a couple other variations of this. There's something called LADA, L-A-D-A, which stands for latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood.
Okay.
Basically, it means that it's a similar problem, but it happens later in life, because type 1 diabetes usually happens in childhood. So this happens later in life, and it's much more slowly progressing. So if someone has an autoimmune diabetes that happened later in life, after they were, say, 25, 30 years old, and it's sort of slowly causing them to become diabetic, there is evidence that can be halted, and that some of the function of the remaining beta cells, the remaining insulin-producing cells of the pancreas, can be enhanced so that person may not need insulin or may be able to minimize their insulin use. And those are really good things. But once those cells are destroyed in typical type 1 diabetes, really we're just sort of hoping for some advancements in pancreatic transplant and stem cell therapy, and something that's going to be able to, allow the pancreas to somehow become new again. And that's unfortunately, I think, still a little bit of a far away.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? How, being an autoimmune condition, we still don't understand the mechanism as to why the immune system would destroy those beta cells. Like, it's just a weird thing. And so this sort of just happens with a lot of people early on in life, and they start to experience the symptoms, obviously, with that, and then they go and get checked out, and they figure out this is what's going on with them.
Yeah, the stories I hear from my type 1 patients over the years are pretty dramatic. I mean, usually it's oftentimes missed for a while, so you have a 5-year-old who just all of a sudden is throwing up and they're losing weight, and, they just don't seem well. They're struggling. And, usually you think, oh, maybe they're sick, or, who knows what's going on. They test them for different infections and so forth. And oftentimes it turns out to be diabetes. And in those cases, usually the blood sugar is very, very high. So it can become dangerous. I've had people, normal blood sugar, I said, is 85. We've had people whose blood sugar has been, 500, 600, sometimes over 1,000. It can get really, really high. So it's scary. And when you have a blood sugar that high, it becomes very, very dangerous. You have a blood sugar of like 500, 600, that can put you into, basically, it can kill you. So it's scary. These kids, and then it's a process. You have a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old dealing with this. It's difficult on the families. It's a process of trying to figure out how to manage all this, and then you got to manage your kid's diet, and if you have kids, you know how difficult that can be anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's already an issue. And plus, if you have one kid with something and then you have 2 or 3 other kids that can eat normal, then you have a real issue there.
Just cycling back real quick to the causes. From the work of Alicia Fasano at Harvard, we know that there are certain factors that are in place with autoimmune disease. Typically, there's some genetics, and then usually there's a trigger. And that could be a number of things. In type 1 diabetes, we know that cow's milk is one of the triggers. We know that gluten can be a trigger. We know that certain infections can be triggers. But there's some sort of trigger. And then oftentimes, or according to Dr. Fasano, you also need to have a leaky gut. And leaky gut is one of those things that allows oftentimes those triggers to get into the bloodstream to set off this immune reaction. So we do know that there's some commonalities with autoimmune disease, and we can do everything we can, especially if there's a genetic history of autoimmune disease. We can do everything we can to avoid those triggers and keep the gut really healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, it's such a systemic thing, right? I mean, you talk about all the chemicals and the environmental toxins that we're exposed to. I mean, it seems like our current default world that we're living in, if you're living in a major city or even the suburbs, it's just basically under assault. And so our environment is such that it's setting up these bizarre situations inside our body. I wanted to ask you about some things people could do for testing. So, like, I know there's lots of different tests you can do. Like you mentioned early on in the show, the hemoglobin A1C, there's fasting insulin levels, and there's a series of other tests that people could do. And I'm curious about what your thoughts are on the tests, as well as how they can go about getting those tests, and then what numbers they should look for when it comes to those things.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And it's so important, because by the time you become diabetic, by the time your blood sugar crosses over that threshold into diabetes, this has been developing for decades, and it's usually pretty far advanced at that point. If you can catch it earlier, that's better. And unfortunately, if you're just looking at blood sugar, your body will fight to keep your blood sugar normal or close to normal as long as it possibly can. It's kind of like your temperature. If your body's fighting an infection, your temperature might go up a little bit, but by the time that temperature jumps up to 104, 105, your body has already been fighting that for a long time, and it's sort of in emergency mode at that point. And
Hmm.
it's the same thing with blood sugar. By the time your blood sugar jumps up over even 120, you're in emergency mode at that point. You've sort of lost the ability to regulate your blood sugar. And in fact, there's a lot that happens even before it starts to rise at all. And the underlying mechanism really has more to do with insulin. So I recommend that people get their insulin levels checked. Now, sometimes it's difficult to get your doctor to do that if you don't have diabetes or have a blood sugar problem. But you can go to a direct lab and pay, $50 for it or whatever. But it's well worth doing because knowing your fasting insulin will really help you to know sort of what's under the surface with your metabolic health and blood sugar control. There's a uh, there's a few numbers I'll throw out there too. So if you do have your fasting insulin tested, don't use the lab reference range because that's more for uh, certain diseases that test is usually ordered for. Uh,
Okay.
there's a there's a tumor produce or insulin producing tumor, for example, in the pancreas called an insulinoma, and that's what those reference ranges are for. So we have to apply a functional range. And the functional range for a fasting insulin is around 3 to 6. So the lab reference range might say 22 or 24 or something like that. You really want to use about 3 to 6 units. And if it gets over 10, we know that that is very high insulin levels and it indicates insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is what ultimately causes type 2 diabetes. But you can be insulin resistant for many years before you become diabetic. And the problem is that when you have it and you have elevated insulin from that, that elevated insulin causes a lot of damage and stress to the body, including affecting the kidneys, the heart, the cardiovascular system, even our vision and sexual function, and our brain.
Hmm.
So it's good to check that and check it as early as you can. And if your doctor doesn't want to do it, there's in almost all states you can go to a direct lab and just pay for it and have it done. It's well worth it.
Interesting. Interesting. What about like fasting triglycerides or CRP, high density CRP or sensitivity to CRP?
So CRP is an inflammation marker, and that's important. We like to see the CRP under 0.7 or 0.8.
Okay.
It'll get elevated in both chronic and acute inflammatory states. So if you have a tooth infection or you're fighting off a cold, it can go high in the short term, but it usually goes a lot higher. So we might see it at 5, 6, or 10 even
Hmm.
if you're dealing with an acute infection. The chronic systemic level seems to be like 1 to 3 or maybe 1 to 5 on a CRP. So we want it well below 1. If it gets
Okay.
over 1, that's starting to indicate sort of chronic systemic inflammation, which drives insulin resistance, which drives diabetes. So that's an important test to do. You mentioned triglycerides, which is really important. There's a number of studies showing that elevated triglycerides is a good predictor of insulin resistance and diabetes. In fact, there's a formula that you can use even if you don't have a fasting insulin to tell whether or not you are insulin resistant. And that formula uses glucose and triglycerides. It's called the triglyceride glucose index. And I can share it with you if you want.
Yeah,
It's
please.
not complicated, but you just need to know how to find the natural log on your calculator. So if you've got like a iPhone or a smartphone, if you open the calculator and turn it sideways, it turns into a scientific calculator. And
Oh,
there's a little button there. It's LN, stands for natural log. It's right in the middle of the iPhone calculator. But what you do is you multiply glucose times triglycerides, and then you hit that little button, the natural log button, and divide it by 2. So it sounds complicated, but it's really, once you do it a couple times, it's not that complicated. I'll give you an example here. I'll just pull mine up real quick. So
Yeah.
let's say my glucose is, we'll do good numbers. We'll say it's 85.
Okay.
And I multiply my triglycerides, let's say, are like 90.
Okay.
And then I turn it. I'll actually show you here. You
Yeah.
can see this. It's sort of right. If I can get my finger up here, it's
Oh, I see.
going the wrong way. It's right there in the middle. It says LN. So we hit that, and then we divide by 2. And that number should be below 4.5. So this comes in at 4.47.
Interesting.
If we do a different example where we go, let's say the blood sugar is 95, and let's say our triglycerides are 120. We do that one.
95. Okay.
Hit that little natural log button, divide by 2, and that gives 4.67. So that's over 4.5. So that would indicate insulin resistance.
Interesting.
So that's something simple that you can do with tests that pretty much everybody should have. You should be getting a glucose and a standard lipid panel done at least once a year if your doctor's paying attention. So you should have those numbers. You punch them in, and you can tell whether or not you've got some issues with insulin sensitivity.
Interesting. Let's get into a couple practical things before we close out here. Like, if someone does feel like if they ate too much sugar, what kinds of things could they do? Whether it's herbs like berberine. I know there's different things that you could take for blood sugar balancing. Like different herb places will sell stuff like that. Probiotics, exercise. Like, if you feel like you sat down and you had a big old pizza and a big old, thing of ice cream and you're just feeling great, but then you realize, oh man, I just blew it. At that point, what could someone do?
Yeah, we call that damage control, and it's there are some strategies that you can use. One of them, if you know you're going to do it, like right before, one strategy to use is buffering that sugar with some protein, fiber, and fat. So protein, fiber, and fat will buffer carbs and glucose. So, like if you're going to eat some French fries, for example, make sure you add, if you can, some protein to that. So maybe have some some sort of protein before you eat the French fries rather than after.
Okay.
Let's say you're getting a burger and fries. Toss the bun, eat the burger, have the fries after you eat the burger, and the fat in the burger and the protein in the burger is going to buffer the absorption of the glucose from the potatoes.
Okay.
If you're going to have a dessert, it does make sense to do it at the end of the meal, not the beginning, because it'll, that food that you're eating will buffer the sugar that's in that, in that dessert, and so you'll absorb it more slowly. And that's important. We don't want the sugar in there to begin with, but if you're going to put it in there, we don't want it to cause a huge spike. The huge glucose spikes are what cause a lot of the damage.
I see.
So if you can put it in a way where, some of the other food is buffering, it'll slow the absorption. Fiber is the other one that helps. So you can either eat high fiber foods like salad or vegetables, or you can take some fiber, some dietary fiber in pill or powdered form. So those are 3 ways to help. And then afterwards, one of the best ways is to just get up and go for a walk. So, if I've overeaten, or if I, decided to have, a little bit of sugar with a meal, at the end of a meal, some carbs that I don't normally eat. One of the ways that I like to sort of burn that off is to go for a nice walk. So remember, I talked earlier about how your body's going to store that, and it wants to store it as glycogen. But if your glycogen stores are full, then it's going to convert it to fat, or it's not going to be able to process it all. It's going to raise your blood sugar. So if we can burn through some glycogen by, going for a walk or doing some sort of exercise, even just going to the bathroom and doing like 20 or 30 air squats or something like that, it's going to help to burn through some glycogen, which is going to help you to utilize that glucose more. And then the other thing I like to do with damage control is we have a rule that we call it next meal, which means we try to nip that in the bud. So if you decide to do that, don't punish yourself for it. Don't judge yourself for it. Enjoy it. But at the very next meal, make sure you reset your blood sugar. Don't let it become a habit, because those things can very quickly become habits.
Interesting. Yeah, there was a guest a while back. I think it was one of our Ayurvedic friends that was on, and she talked about an herb called Gymnema sylvestri. Are you familiar with that? Because she talked about how it basically cuts the amount of carbs, in half of what your body has to deal with. Does that work, do you think?
So Gymnema does a couple of things. It does slow the absorption. It's not going to get rid of the sugar, but it will slow the sugar. Cinnamon does the same thing. So if you can add some cinnamon to the meal, that's another one. It acts actually much like fiber without the fiber. So cinnamon and Gymnema, if you carry around a little bottle with you, some capsules, you can take that with meals and it'll help. The other thing it does is it'll block the taste of sugar on your tongue. Glutamine can do this as well, but you've got to put it on the tongue. So if you just take a capsule of Gymnema, it usually comes in 200 or 400 milligram capsules. If you just take one of those, it will help you delay the absorption of glucose through the gut, but it's not going to necessarily break those sugar or carb cravings. But if you put it on your tongue, it's been shown, and it's used in Ayurveda this way. Ayurvedic herbs are meant to be tasted. They're not just meant to be swallowed. So, and Chinese herbs as well. And a lot of them have bitter qualities, and bitter quality actually will improve blood sugar and suppress appetite.
And what do you think about berberine and maybe some probiotics if someone is looking for damage control? Do you think those would be good to do?
Perceive sugar, which is pretty powerful.
Sorry, Brian, you cut out right before that. What did you say about that?
Yeah, I think my I think it died on me.
Yeah.
So it can you hear me?
I can hear you, but your video is cut out, but we can still hear you.
Okay. Okay. Not sure why, but all right, I'll just continue with audio. So the Gymnema will actually make you taste sugar less. It actually helps to block your tongue's ability to perceive sugar, so you don't crave it as much. And glutamine does the same thing. We often recommend glutamine for gut health. You can take some L-glutamine powder, put a little bit of that on your tongue, and it will stop sugar cravings as well. So if you're craving sugar or carbohydrates, starches, carbohydrates, snacks, pretzels, that kind of thing, using some glutamine powder or some Gymnema sylvestri can make a big difference.
Okay, cool. And what about, I think that my question before got kind of lost, berberine and probiotics. Do you think those would be good for damage control? I'm basically just trying to give people the the option of eating some bad food and giving them something that they could do.
Yeah, berberine's been shown to help to improve the way you use sugar, and it's been shown to help the way you use insulin. So berberine can be good, and I mentioned cinnamon. Cinnamon is really good. After a meal, it's hard to fix, once you've put the sugar in, but those supplements can be helpful. And if you're going to do it, then it's not a bad idea to have some of those on hand. I think probably the best.
Oh no, Dr. Mowll, you cut out. Oh, I think we lost you. Right when he said it's probably one of the best things, and then it cut out. Brian, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. It looks like something may have happened on your end. But you know what you could do is use that link. If you can hear me still, use that link. And that I sent you in the email. Maybe you can come back in. So let me close your little input here in vMix. And feel free to come back in if you can hear me. So I guess we'll just, have that be the end of the interview unless he comes back. I apologize, guys, but it looks like he was about ready to say something really cool there. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that. We have a lot of cool stuff happening 3 days a week. We do shows Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10:45 a.m. Pacific time live, and it's a lot of fun. We get to hang out. And one of the last questions I was going to ask him about blood sugar was its relationship to cancer, as well as longevity and anti-aging. And, a lot of people are now saying that there's a connection between rapid aging and the amount of sugar that you consume. But then there's also, aside from all of this work too, we had a guy on the show years ago. What was his name? Danny Roddy. Danny Roddy was on the show, and he was a proponent of the work of Dr. Ray Peat. And Dr. Peat sort of says the sort of opposite of a lot of is sort of countercultural thought. And Dr. Ray Peat is a really interesting guy, and he has a lot of articles about sugar and what it actually really does in the body. So, we might have him on the show here pretty soon too. So we're working on getting Ray Peat on the show, but there's a lot of issues with sugar and utilizing and understand how to use sugar correctly for metabolic health and to actually get the amount of sugar and energy you need in your body, but not too much so that your body, it feeds cancer cells and things like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this show. Like I said before, I wanted to share with you guys too something really, really cool. Which is the final two products I wanted to tell you guys about. Speaking of blood sugar and your animals, a lot of times, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but people are actually feeding their dogs. They're feeding their animals like hot dogs and bread and cake and crackers and cookies. And oh my goodness, you just look at these poor dogs and there's nothing they could do about it, right? By eating pizza or something, I feel so sad for these dogs, and I'm just such a dog lover myself. We have two little pups, and what we feed our dogs, a lot of times people ask us, is the Barf World raw dog food. And so what's cool about this is that it mimics what's found in nature. So if you have a dog and you're looking to optimize their health, maybe increase their vitality, increase their longevity, improve their skin health, improve their coat health, Barf World is awesome because what it does is, like I said before, it mimics nature. So it includes a perfect acid-alkaline balance for your dog. So if a dog were in the wild, any dog that would catch an animal and eat it would eat the skin, would eat the fur, would eat the muscle meat, would eat the organs, would actually eat the bone as well. So when an animal consumes the bone of another animal, it's very alkaline. Muscle meat is very acidic. And then you have the buffering compounds of what's inside the animal, the gut of what that animal ate. And so they're getting the vegetation. And so this is what the Barf World does, is it mimics this, and it puts the bone, the muscle meat, and the organ meat in your dog's food. And it's really, really cool. And our dogs just thrive on this stuff. And so it's a little bit of a challenge, though, switching your dog to an all raw food diet if they've been on cooked food for a long time. So we recommend you go slowly, but you'll see tremendous increases in their energy. The volume of their poop and their stools changes dramatically. And I just think if you're going to have a dog, why not let them live a long time? And you don't want to be going through cancer and all of this stuff. I mean, more than 50% of dogs now get cancer. And one of the major reasons is the food they're eating. And so this is why we love this Barf World raw dog food. So check that out. If you're watching on YouTube, there's links down in the description for this particular product, the Barf World raw dog food. Get your dog on this stuff, and they will see tremendous differences. You will notice an energy increase. It's just an amazing thing to do. And then finally, I wanted to tell you guys about too these blue blocking glasses. I don't know if you probably noticed the glasses I have on today, but they're by a company called Blue Blocks. And if you follow our work, you know that we are big proponents of blocking blue light, which is one of the main things that we can do to increase our health. So there's a lot of different people now doing research on the effects of what blue light does to your melatonin production, which is the number one anti-cancer hormone. It destroys melatonin, destroys DHA levels in the body. It causes the body to have to produce more ATP to carry out its functions. All of this is happening because of blue light. Blue light is very excitable. The wavelengths are very short and close together. And so what it does is it suppresses melatonin production, which has over 4,000 different processes in the body. It's not just a sleep hormone. So it's really, really critical. And if you want to prevent cancer, you want to prevent disease, and mostly if you want to increase your sleep and just sleep really well, I recommend getting these yellow glasses. You can probably see here. A lot of people ask like how we do it. I have probably 15 different pairs of glasses from different companies, some cheap ones, some expensive ones, some stylish ones, and some ones that are even all the way red. So I recommend these yellow ones for during the daytime. This way you don't produce or you don't block all the blue light, just some of it, because you don't want to start producing melatonin during the day and fall asleep at work, right? Or while you're driving. And then in the evening, I recommend these orange glasses. And these are the glasses I'm wearing now because I have to wear these now because I cannot reduce the blue light. We have a program in our store called Iris as well that reduces the blue light on your computer, but this is the same computer that I'm using as the output for the show that you're watching right now. So I can't use the Iris, otherwise you guys would be seeing an orange guest and an orange host. So because of that, I wear the orange glasses during the show, and the show is only an hour long. So, but I'm telling you guys, start mitigating your light environment. Please look into this. This is really, really important. If you want to live a long, healthy, disease-free life, it's really important to get your light environment correct. So check out these blue blocking glasses. They are amazing. We did a show with Andy Mant, who's the owner of Blue Blocks, and we talked all about light. And this is a subject that you can just go on forever and ever and ever, understanding how even the entire food web is tied to photosynthesis. As Dr. Jack Kruse says, as Adam Bergstrom says, it all ties back to light and photons. And this is what our mitochondria do. It takes the food that we eat and doesn't turn them, doesn't use them as carbohydrates or proteins, but it turns them into electrons. And this is what happens at the mitochondrial level. And the mitochondria are primarily stimulated and altered and changed from light, and also sound, vibration, temperature affects our mitochondria as well. So if you really want to be healthy, one of the best things I could recommend that you do is to start blocking blue light in your life, whether that's blue light from the indoor environment that you're working and living in, or blue light coming off your devices like your computers and laptops and things. So really important, guys. And I think that, if you use the code EHR, Andy will give you 10% off of these glasses. So highly recommended. Start working on your light environment in your home, and check out our store too. And thanks for supporting us in our store. You guys are amazing. I really appreciate it. Let me head on over to the chat room and see what you guys are talking about. Dr. Jason Fung, JB40, says, people save yourselves. Yeah, we were going to have Dr. Fung on the show a while back, but we had one of his co-workers that works with him, another doctor from his organization. So JB40, if you want to check out the shows we've done with them. And Callie says, how do I support Extreme Health Radio through Amazon? If you go to our homepage, extremehealthradio.com, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a little Amazon link there. And if you click that every time you make a purchase, that would be tremendously helpful. So I appreciate that a lot. So thank you, Callie. I really appreciate you thinking of us before you make an Amazon purchase. So really, really great. Angie says, JB40, relax. Some of us might be learning what is this guy explains things very well. So yeah, you guys are nice and cordial in the chat room. I like that. It's great to see you. I mean business all the way from Portugal, I believe, right? Angie's here. Chris Sellers is here. Michelle Simmons. Lauren King is here. Angie, I mentioned before, JB40, Callie, so many people here in the chat room. It's really awesome. So thanks, guys, for joining us. Greg Lewis, LL, is that LLI? So yeah, if you guys haven't subscribed to our show on iTunes, we're releasing shows every single day. So we're doing like 2 to 3 new podcasts per week. And then we're doing our best of episodes. So every single day you'll get a new show in iTunes. So make sure to subscribe over there. And I think that we're going to cut it short. We're going to do a little shorter after show today. Hope you guys enjoyed this show with Dr. Brian Mowll. Go over and check out his website. There's a link if you guys are watching in the description, and you can learn more about the work that he does. I was going to ask him if he sees patients virtually, which he probably does. Yeah, if you have anyone with blood sugar issues, he would be the guy. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Love you all very much. Doris, great to have you here. Awesome, from St. Louis, Virginia. I mean business. Oh, I thought you were in, am I mixing you up with somebody else? I thought you were in Portugal. Maybe I mixed you up with somebody else. I mean business. Dang, I missed another show. The show should be available here pretty soon, as soon as YouTube processes it. So thank you guys for your support and your support over the years for our work. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And, our goal and our mission here is to educate people through interviewing some of the most inspiring and educational minds in the world, whether they're authors, scientists, researchers, doctors, natural doctors, chiropractors, people that are really on the cutting edge of health and longevity, so that you guys can have all the tools necessary to take your health to new levels. So that's what we're all about. If you really want to go even further than what our show does, check out the Extreme Health Academy. If you guys are watching on YouTube, there's a link to it. You can grab a free 14-day trial. And we just released something really cool. We're just finished it, and we're going to launch it here pretty soon inside the Academy, which is really cool. It's the health database. So we answer questions every Sunday on the inside the Extreme Health Academy. And what we've done is we've categorized every single question and every single answer from Dr. John Bergman and myself and Dr. John Bergman's son, Michael Bergman, who's a wealth of knowledge himself. And we've compiled all of this data from different sort of perspectives, because a lot of people focus on one thing, and we're trying to be as well-rounded as we possibly can. So we're looking at like things that you may never even have heard of and how they may be affecting your health, like family constellation therapy, spiritual connection, having a purpose in life, and how that affects your connection to your family members, and how that goes back 3 generations, and it even goes forward 3 generations, and how this idea of recall healing affects our nervous system, and we download these things from previous generations. So we talk a lot about the spiritual, emotional aspect of health inside the Academy, as well as the biophotons, the biohacks, the light, water, and magnetism piece of health, and how light affects your mitochondria much more than food does. And a lot of people think it's just all about food, but really, from a physics perspective, when you really get down to it, it comes down to electrons, photons, and protons. And when we can understand how the body produces ATP and the mitochondria actually function, we can start working on that deeper physical level that's still sort of balancing between the physical and the spiritual. And then we also get into cleansing and detoxification and all the different treatments. And there's a whole community inside the Extreme Health Academy of people just like you guys that are really wanting to take their health to the next level. And so we're all chatting and communicating. And as you can imagine, doing a radio show, I get so many emails per day. I just can't respond to everybody. But inside the Academy, we make sure to get back to just about everyone. And there's awesome conversations going on. People inspiring each other, sharing with each other what's working for them and what's not. So the Extreme Health Academy is really an awesome place. And if you really want to take your health to new levels and get the support too that you need, like, we can't go through this on our own. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have any really, do I have any people in my life directly other than my wife, Kate, who's on the show? But I don't really have anybody in my immediate circle who support me in my health journey. People sort of understand a little bit and maybe think I'm a little bit crazy. I'm sure you guys watching have friends and family that think you're absolutely nuts, right? Like blocking blue light, red light in your home, and ketosis and intermittent fasting and coffee enemas. Why the hell would you do a coffee enema? All this kind of stuff. And so what we're trying to do inside the Academy is get to the next level, right? Focus on the treatments, the biohacks, the foundational lifestyle approaches that we can all utilize and take our health to new levels. Because what's actually possible for us? Like, is it possible? Like, I'm not just really interested in living the same amount of time that everybody else lives and maybe just die in my sleep. I've got something that I want to give and impart to the world, and I'm sure you guys do too, where you have something that you actually want to do and help people, right? And so is it possible for human beings to live to we're 150, 160? Is that possible? And can we do that with a strong, healthy body? And so these are some of the ideas and the unique things that we're talking about inside the Extreme Health Academy. So I'd recommend you guys sign up for the free 14-day trial and check it out. Tag me in the forums, Justin Stellman, and let me know that you signed up. And I'd love to help you in any way possible to get to that next level. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Doris, I'm glad you're here as well. I'm glad you enjoyed the show as well. So cool stuff. So this Friday we have a cool interview with Mark Gober, I think his name is, and he wrote an interesting book called An End to Upside Down Thinking, and we'll talk with him about his work, creating your own reality, spirituality, all of these types of esoteric principles. And it's going to be really interesting, the subconscious mind. So that'll be really an interesting show on Friday with Mark Gober. If you guys want to check out his book or look him up on YouTube, Mark Gober, An End to Upside Down Thinking. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube and iTunes, and you'll get new shows every single day. We love you very, very much, and I will see you on Friday morning at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, have a great day, and I'll see you on Friday morning.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information in this blog is discussed in the context of numerous conditions, it can be dangerous to take action based on any information in this blog or to start any health program without first consulting a health professional. The content found here is for informational purposes only and is in no way intended as medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as a treatment/cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be continued as such. Always work with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. This information is provided as is, and the reader/viewer assumes all risks from the use, non-use, or misuse